All right. Hello, everyone. I won't say good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our next Volunteer TED Talk. My name is Katie Ronald, for those of you that might not know me, and I am filling in the very big shoes of Michelle Stook while she takes a 12-month secondancy over to BirdLife. So I am based over in Perth, and we'll be keeping a track of all of the different time zones as I move through meetings over the next 12 months. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people who might be joining us today. For me, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of Noongar Boodja and where I'm joining you from. Today, we've got a presentation by one of our long-term volunteers, Paul Bateman. Paul has been volunteering with Bush Heritage for around 6 years, and he's visited many of our reserves in Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria. So Paul is going to share his experience as part of the Scottsdale Murrumbidgee Adventurous volunteers, who were a group of New South Wales paddle certified volunteers traversing the river to manage water and species health. So I've got you all on mute at the moment for the presentation. So if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat. And at the end, we'll go through the questions there and we'll also open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask their questions. So Paul, once I find you on my list, if you'd like to share your screen. Yeah, give me a second. All right, there you go, Paul. You should be able to share your screen now. All right, have you got yourself off mute, Paul?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, we'll get started.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul Bateman. I'll start off with we're honoured to work on the ancestral lands of the Narragaow, Ngunnawal and people, which is where the paddling was done, and where I live is the Wonnarua people, and we recognise their continuing connection with and knowledge about land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them, their cultures, to elders past, present and emerging. So the Adventurous paddling program was held in the spring and the autumn months of 2018 and 19. So, screen there. Hang on. Just trying to get rid of a bit of so I can read. So the Upper Murrumbidgee Demonstration Reach is an organisation of groups of people to protect, or organisations to protect, approximately 100 kilometres of the Bidgee from Breadbow to Kosciuszko Sands in the ACT. So the mission of the UMDR, of which Bush Heritage is one of the groups that are part of it, is to improve the fish habitat and protect the health of the Upper Murrumbidgee, targeting erosion hotspots and woody weeds. So the Adventurous paddling program was organised by the UMDR and hosted by Bush Heritage. It was part of Australian River Restoration Centre's Ribbons of Carbon Upper Bidgee program and was funded by the New South Wales Recreational Fishing Trust. So to start the program, Bush Heritage was part of that demonstration reach. So we used Scottsdale Reserve as a base for the volunteers to camp, and we're able to make use of the field safety system of Bush Heritage when we were accessing the water. We also accessed the river from Scottsdale and also private property along the river to the north of Scottsdale. So we had to start, before we could get on the water, everyone had to do a 2-day paddling course to train in paddling in moving water. And that was conducted by Paddle New South Wales under the guidance of Ian Royd. So that was held over several weekends, and because the river was a bit low at Scottsdale at times, some of the programs were held in the near Cotter Dam. So when I did my training, I was able to do it at Scottsdale because we had enough water in the river by then. So even though I've done a lot of sea kayaking, paddling in the rafts was a lot more to learn. So the main one was, because there's a group of people in the raft, someone has to be appointed the leader. Otherwise, everyone's paddling in different directions, and when you get to a rapid, could be cause of a lot of problems. So the leader usually he steers the raft, and then he gives the commands such as stop paddling or start paddling, left side paddle forward or left side paddle reverse, just depending on what's happening with the river. So you learn to read the river. So you have different classes of rapids, which are classed from class 1 to class 6, 6 being the most difficult rapid. Then you also learn terms like eddies, which can be affected by the flow of the river, and usually a good place to, if you can get into one, to pull up and have a bit of a rest. You got rooster tails, stoppers, strainers, different terms like that. Strainers just maybe a log in the river where you can't paddle past it. Then we had paddle strokes. So there's a forward paddle, reverse paddle, a draw stroke, sweep, and a J paddle or J stroke. We also learned how to ferry glide. Which is a way of getting across the current from one side of the river to the other. Then we had to capsize, I'll go back one. Capsize and re-enter the raft. We also had to learn how to throw a rescue rope. We have to rescue someone from the river. And then down the bottom, you'll see there's a method of walking across the river, holding each other as a group and making sure no one gets washed away. So once our training was finished, when I was there, we had a week of paddling every day. So under the guidance of Antioch from the UMDR, we began our little adventures. So each day you had to come down, pump up the rafts, load all our gear in, pull all our PPE on, log on to Bush Heritage's field safety system and do a safety briefing, and then we could get onto the water. So that usually took about an hour to get all that stuff done. So everything you had to tie into the raft as well, so in case you capsized, although it looks pretty calm there. So we're off doing our work. Nice, it was a nice little stretch of water to paddle in some of the sections there. So one of our jobs was to find willows, and we used a mallet and a chisel to make a little cut into the cambium layer at about a 2-finger spacing around the girth. So there's quite a little cuts to make. So as soon as you made the cut, you had to put on we used phosphate, and that had to be put on within 30 seconds of making the cut. So you can see where there's a tree with a lot of branches, there's a lot of cuts to be done. Some of the smaller ones we used cutters, so cut and paste. And we also had to look for box elders. We either, if they were small enough, we'd pull them out and just leave them on the bank to dry. Or if they were big enough, we'd cut and poison them. So most willows are classified as a weed of national significance. Their root mass extends into the water, so that causes siltation, which can result in flooding and change in the course of the river. And also there's a mass fall of leaves in the autumn, which results in poor water quality. And shading also lowers the biodiversity of plants and small animals. So we're doing the cut, so you can see all the red around the tree there. That's the where we've cut and put the poison on. The poison is registered to be used near waterways, so it's quite safe. There's some places there we had to actually stand in the water to get to the willows. So moving further down the river. Quite another nice little section there. There's a nice little willow there that needed to be done. You can see how the leaves are all hanging out over the water. So when they drop, that's when they cause problems. Also, you have to worry about the roots of the willows. So a lot of places where we find them and pull them out of the water. So towards the end of that week, we had a visit from Jeff Cottrell. He's from the Friends of the Colo. So he introduced us to using a drill, which is a lot quicker. So we actually drill in about 2 inches and you have a little bottle and squirt your poison into the bottle, into the hole that you drilled. So if you're pretty clever, you could do it both. If you use both hands, you could do both jobs at the same time. There's a couple of our volunteers in there under the fairly big tree there. And again, some places you have to use the raft to get to the willows. That's Antia and Jeff there. And a little smoko break, and you see a lot of places, a lot of flood debris piled up against the trees. So you can see by using the drill, you can have like instead of two people just using the chisel and the mallet, you can have a person with a drill and the bottle at the same time. So you can get a lot more done. So it wasn't all paddling. So to come back home, because the river was so low in spots, there wasn't enough water to paddle. So we spent a lot of time walking. So it was good in the morning, we could paddle down, but not so good in the afternoon to come back against the current. But that was all part of the fun. So we also, as part of, also because, sorry, aside from doing the willows, we also did some long stem planting. So that's where we've got the long stem tube stock in there, and we'd paddle down and find a piece, either where we'd been poisoning a lot of willows, we'd plant in there as well for when the willows died, we'd have some vegetation to replace them. And also where there was bank erosion, we'd plant in there. So some of the plants we used were tea tree, bottle brushes, kunzia and ribbon gums. So a lot of these stock we can get from the nursery at Scottsdale. So you can see there's a fair bit of gear we got to tie into the rafts each day. Then we used hand augers, so we can drill down, because it's fairly soft ground there, we could drill down about 500 mil and plant the tube stock in. So the idea of planting them so deep is if you get a flood, hopefully they're anchored in a bit better. And also if you get stock or roos or anyone wanting to nibble off the top of it, there's a less chance of them pulling the plant out if you only just plant normal tube stock. So you see we had a fair few to plant there. We actually had a little bit of a rapid to get through there. It was a good bit of fun. So some of these pictures are other different groups now. So these guys had a bit of fun in this rapid. We never got to paddle at any of those sort of rapids. That one just wasn't quite enough water to get through, so I had to walk it. These guys are having a good bit of fun. Although there's a rock there they've got to get over yet, so I'm not sure how they went with that. So there's been other trips that these guys are, I think, are after the fires. There's been some trips to do some more planting. As you can see, the lands. This is at Scottsdale, and the river near Scottsdale. It's fairly burnt out. So hopefully the planting will re-establish the vegetation there. Another group from another planting expedition. There's going to be a good little ride there, I'd say. So UMDR has got a Facebook page. If anyone wants to have a look at that, you can see some of the events that they do. And also it comes on occasionally onto Bush Heritage's Facebook. September is Threatened Species Month, so the UMDR and the Australian River Restoration Centre are hosting a webinar series, which has been 3 of them already. But it shows the great work they're doing in protecting the aquatic species in the Upper Murrumbidgee. So I highly recommend that if people can get onto that and have a look at those webinars. And that's it. Anybody got any questions?
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Paul. It's certainly a different way of doing weed control. Really, really interesting. We've got heaps of questions coming through the chat, so I just want to make sure I get them all. So I think the first couple have been answered. Someone has asked, how long does it take for the willow to die?
A fair while, I think. Depends on the size of them as well. So if Antia's here at all, she was going to be here, but she might be able to answer that.
Yeah,
That's the thing. We don't get to see, like, we get to do the jobs, but sometimes you don't go back for a while and you don't get to see the results.
We do have UMDR facilitator. Is that you, Anthea? If you want to come off mute.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Thanks for the great presentation, Paul, and also thanks for your work on the Bidgee. Yeah, and we really appreciate your expertise too, and that you bring to the program. So I just wanted to mention that. In terms of the willows and how long they take to die, so they get stem injected. From our experience with contractors and the monitoring, we can control willows all year round, even when they don't have leaf fall. And so depending on when you treat them, that will influence the time that they take to die. If you treat a willow when it doesn't have any leaves through the stem injection method, all of the poison will be taken down into the root, and then in the springtime they'll produce a little bit of leaf, and then the plant sort of dies off. So it can take a few months for that to happen. Obviously, if you have a small willow, anything under 2 meters away from the river, you can foliar spray. If you put the glyphosate straight onto a leaf, you might see that the plant starts to dry off and brown off within a few days. But certainly, if you were to poison a mature willow and then remove it, the best practice would be that you would leave at least a few months so that there's no living matter left before you remove that material. So in areas where you can access with a machine, not the ones that Paul showed, the best practice is that we do remove the willows. Yep.
Fantastic. And someone has asked what type of, I know you say it was a chemical that you can use near waterways, but someone's just asked what it was that you were using.
Yeah. Phosphate. Yeah. I'm not sure of the brand.
All right. Doesn't look like we've got any other questions in the chat. If anyone else has any other questions and would like to come off mute, feel free to ask anything. Yeah, Rosemary and David?
Yeah, we couldn't work out how we typed a question. We couldn't work out how to send it to you. So this is our second line of defence. I was asking similar to the last question. Is there a particular type of glyphosate for use near waterways? I think there might be one. Because otherwise, just the ordinary glyphosate, I think, is recommended not use it near waterways. But I think there's a special kind that you can use more safely with waterways.
Roundup Bioactive.
Roundup Bioactive. Okay, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Libby.
Yeah.
Yeah, so someone's answered that in the chat, Roundup Bioactive glyphosate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there we go. How many willows can be done in a week, or I would say kind of as a trip that you do? How many willows would you be tackling?
Good question. I never actually counted them. Depends how many people you got with you, the size of the willows. Like sometimes you can spend an hour just if it's a fairly big one. By the time you either drill all the holes or chisel the holes. And depends how many branches it's got. So yeah, it can vary.
Yeah. How long were you normally out there for each trip?
Oh, some of those trips are like a weekend thing. But,
yeah.
I was out for 9 days. Like it was 2 days training and then 7 days, and you're out all day pretty much.
Yeah, you have sore arms at the end of each day.
Oh, you're not paddling all day.
Yeah.
Like you paddle along and then you might stop, and then like we had one day there, we just spent a lot of time just crawling through all the vegetation, just pulling out box elders.
Yeah.
Little growths. So
Leah's
depends
asked
how big the clump is.
Yeah.
How big the clump of willows is.
Yep. Yep. Fair enough. Lee has asked if you catalogue other weeds surrounding the river as you're going along.
We didn't, but I'm sure it depends on on the trip. But our trip was just box elders and willows.
Yep. And Pam has asked, were you going back to Scottsdale each night, or did you camp out if you went out for longer trips?
On our trip, we went back to Scottsdale each night because we're only like about 10 k's down the road, or at Scottsdale itself. But yeah, it'd be nice to be able to go out and camp out on the river if you found a nice spot, because there is some nice camping spots there. But that means you've got to take a lot more gear as well.
Yeah, I was thinking that with the amount of gear you already had in the rafts as well.
That's right. At the time we had all our tools and safety gear and stuff, especially if you're planting as well, because you've got plants and augers and stuff.
Yeah. And Anthea, you might be able to help with this next question. Do you see any evidence of success from the previous trips? Are you starting to see dead willows?
So I just want to qualify with that question. So with our Adventurous volunteer program, it's set up to and to take out willows in the more remote parts of the Murrumbidgee. So these are typically areas where there is already a lot of good native vegetation there, and the willows would be rather scattered. So our picture of success in these areas, as can be seen upstream of Scottsdale, when we paddle into those areas now, the willows that we have controlled over quite a few years now have all sort of fallen down, and you don't see any dead willows. If an area has been historically modified and we have a lot of willows that are really dense there, it comes quite of a different question, because you need to look at what function those willows might be having in the ecosystem, such as shading. And then if you kill them all and remove them all, you're removing that function. So if you have threatened species there, you need to make sure that functionality is maintained. So in terms of the Adventurous volunteer program, it's really about weeding in kind of a bush restoration way. Yes, we have been tackling some big willows, but now in the gorge upstream of Scottsdale, it's all really great native vegetation, and the weeding consists now of removing small willows, and that's what success looks like. Success looks like a river that has complete and healthy native vegetation to support the ecological processes. And that's where we're trying to get to with programs such as this.
Yeah, fantastic. We've had a great question come in through from Eve as well. Anthea and Heather, if you're still on the line, I might get both of your help with this one. So what sort of native fauna are kind of living in that vegetation? I guess because it's dying over over a period of time, they're going to be able to move to different vegetation for that, and perhaps more larger trees that are already there, other native trees. But they've asked what happens to that fauna when the trees die. And Heather, I might have to get your help with this one on Scottsdale, with the traditional owners that we work with on Scottsdale and how they're involved with the project.
Would you like to go first, Heather?
Yeah, look, and to be honest, I'm not completely sure. We've got
sorry to throw you under the bus, Heather.
No. Hey, that's what CEOs are for. So I know the team at Scottsdale doing a lot of work with traditional owners across the reserve, and have done a lot of work, particularly looking at cultural artifacts, and then on some particular projects. I'm not sure exactly how much they're involved with this project. Anthea might have a better idea than me, but I know we are, heavily involved with the traditional owners in Scottsdale.
Thank you, Heather. With the UMDR Adventurous volunteers, we don't have a First Nations component as such, but we are working to engage First Nations in the Upper Murrumbidgee Demonstration Reach program more broadly. And there are talks about having a ranger program, and if we found funding for that, would be really great. And community that we've talked to are really interested in getting out on the river and looking after country. So that's something that we're really working towards, but we're still building those relationships. And so we hope to have much more involvement in the future, and having Bush Heritage involved and through the existing relationships at Scottsdale, that's been a real help with that process as well. And so we're working together, and Bush Heritage is supporting us with that aspect, and that's been really great. In terms of animals and birds, again, as I was saying, in a lot of the areas where we work with the UMDR Adventurous Volunteer Program, there is a high level of native vegetation already. But for each of our programs, we do a review of environmental factors, and what that involves is looking at any threatened species or species that might be utilising the river corridor. The Upper Murrumbidgee River is just an amazing place. Around Scottsdale, it actually follows a fault line north to south through the landscape, and even though we're in a subalpine climate, the Upper Murrumbidgee River is really a sheltered spot. In our river we have Macquarie perch, historically we have trout, cod and Murray River crayfish, which are all threatened species, and we have platypus, and then there's a whole, because it's this sheltered corridor within our landscape, it's actually a refuge for a whole lot of other species as well that use the riparian zone. So that's a really good question about the willows and the box elders. Typically what we see with willows is they don't have things like hollows. So when we do our review of environmental factors and we look at the type of habitats that species that in that area and perhaps could be impacted by our work, the habitat that those species favour would be much more the native vegetation, and things like blackberry and willows, especially when there's other vegetation surrounding it that can bounce back and fill that niche. The willow and the blackberry actually a sub-optimum habitat. So as I said, in areas where there is native vegetation, the work that we're doing actually improves that vegetation for the benefit of the species, but it is something that we do assess program by program and site by site, because it's an important thing to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Excuse me. And we just had another question from Sue about the bioactive glyphosate, which Isabel's answered, so thank you for that. And someone has just asked about the different species that you have. Have you got any feral fish species, or is it pretty well native in that area?
I can see we've got Dean on the line. Do you want to answer that question, Dean?
Yeah, sure can. We've got a lot of carp in the Upper Murrumbidgee, and carp actually love willows. So by removing the willows and letting the native plants revegetate the riparian zone, it's going to provide preferential habitat for native fish and crustaceans instead of carp.
Thank you. All right, have we got any other questions, either through the chat or anyone else that would like to come off mute and ask any questions?
Yes, I was wondering whether the 2018-19 plantings have survived the recent very heavy rainfall and flooding that we've had this year in the catchment areas.
I can answer that. After the bushfires, we had a lot of sediment going into the river. So Paul, if you went back to some of those areas, you would be amazed at how much sediment moves through, and it's very mobile, and we have had high flow events. So there has been a lot of deposition, and the course of the river has changed. Anything that's planted higher up, the wetter conditions are actually beneficial to the plants. But in short, we haven't been out on the rivers. The river's been quite high, and so we haven't been out and monitoring that since those plantings. But at some of the sites that I have assessed, which I've been able to get to, if you put in a long stem before it can really spread out its roots, and it's in a lot of sand, you know, you can have that sand moved and the plants get washed away. But once they establish, then they start trapping that sand. But that's sort of part of our trips each season, is to have a look at the work that we've done. But with bank wetting, you do get higher planting success and growth.
Thanks for that. And another one for you, Heather, that you might not be able to answer about Scottsdale. Are there any plans to upgrade the boat ramp?
We've got lots of plans to upgrade a few things. I don't know specifically on the boat ramp, but I'm now going to put it on my Scottsdale list because I've been out that boat ramp a couple of times. And I recognise that we might need a few improvements, particularly after we've had lots of rain, etc. So I'll add it to the list. And as most of you on the call will know, we're also trying to upgrade our facilities out there generally at Scottsdale. We had a few little hiccups getting our approvals through for building upgrades. So we've had to do a bit of rethink. So it's taking us longer. Joys of regulation. But we recognise what an amazing place that is and how much volunteers love working out there. So I'll add the boat ramp to the list.
Thanks, Heather. And thanks for that question, Lee. I see your follow-up comment about that one. Any other last questions? All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Paul, and also for Anthea for your help and Heather answering some of those questions. I know some of you were in the lobby for the first 5 to 10 minutes, so apologies for that. I will send out this recording so you can catch the beginning of the presentation that you missed. And someone was asking about the slides as well. So in that recording, you'll be able to have access to all of the slides. So thank you very much for coming along. And we are going to be looking for more of these talks over the next couple of months, whether we have a break over Christmas and start up next year. We'll see how our planning goes. So if you've got a topic that you'd like to talk about, or if you want to dob someone in, have a chat with me. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everyone. And thank you very much for coming along this afternoon, sorry. See you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.